Good afternoon. So, yeah, let's take a few minutes in quieting our mind, settling it, as well as our body. Let's cultivate the merit field as we did in the morning, as we prepare to say the prayers. The merit fields in the space in front of us, with Buddha Shakyamuni in the center, as well as think of sentient beings surrounding us. Connect with them at all those levels of commonality and connection. When we go for refuge in the Buddha, Dharma and Sangha, ultimately we are going for refuge in the Dharma. Dharma within the Buddha, Dharma within the Sangha, and the Dharma, as we speak of, is not separate from those possessed by the Arya beings all the way to the Buddhahood. And they constitute these two components, the aspect of abandonment, the aspect of freedom from the unwanted, obscuring elements in varying degrees, as well as the path, the Arya path, corresponding Arya path preceding each of the cessations that are led by it. Until unless we have true path and true cessation of any level from the path of seeing onward, until we have that, we can see how our three trainings, which are the main source for generating the true path, which would then lead to true cessation. So in our capacity, the level of the three trainings, beginning with the training of morality, on which we build concentration, on which we then build the wisdom grounded in those two foundations, those will be our refuge. Through them that we will receive the blessings of the Buddha, as well as the Arya beings. So of the three, the training of morality is fundamental. And so we see very clearly in our aspiration to become fully awakened Buddha, how the training of morality, beginning with learning about it, is very crucial. So generate the aspiration that we succeed in building this foundation of morality and bring it to full fruition in the form of perfection of morality within the mind stream of the Buddha, so that we could be of all effective benefit to all sentient beings in the truest sense of the word. So with that as the foundation of our background of our mindset, preparing for this session, let's see the refuge and very immeasurable prayers.
I take refuge until I have awakened in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Sangha. By the merit I create, by listening to the Dharma, I will attain Buddhahood in order to benefit all sentient all sentient beings have happiness in its causes. May all sentient beings be free of suffering and its causes. May all sentient beings not be separated from sorrowless bliss. May all sentient beings abide in equanimity, free of bias, attachment, and anger.
Let's hold Bodhicitta in our minds for a while. Let that be the motivation, primary fundamental motivation for this session and beyond. Yes, now first we have this question from Tenzin, to which I have no answer. The question was, how come the Pratimoksha vows end without death, right? And then the Bodhisattva vows extend beyond that. If it were to be in the Abhidhamma Kosh tradition, the Vaibhashika system, then there's some connection in their acceptance of the Pratimoksha vows as form, as matter, not that evident, relevant, non-revelatory form. So in that case, so they consider the vow to be a form rather a matter. That would be better, though not that visually registerable, undetectable. Yet at the same time spread in the whole of the body. And so in their case, it's quite understandable that with the death, with our passing away, the body will be ceased, and thus anything in the body formed of matter will be gone. But the philosophical systems above Vaibhashika, including, did I say Vaibhashika? Yeah, above that, from Self-centeredness above, they do not consider it, the vows, even the Pratimoksha vows, to be form in nature. Rather, I think they consider it as consciousness, as a form of tomsem. We say tomsem, an attitude of restraint. The attitude of restraint. So in their case, how would we make the case for it not continuing beyond that? Partly, although there will be another why part behind that, partly it's because the Pratimoksha vows are considered to be present only in humans, not in non-humans. Whereas Bodhisattva vow can be present in devas as well as in animals. We call it animal, but may not be the domestic animals that we know of. Who knows? They could come in this form. But in the animal kingdom, we include nagas also. So nagas are very much in their form very much like humans, and they are quite mentally advanced also. And likewise in the Deva realms also. So because it is taken on a human basis, human body, and that's the farthest it could go until one dies. Beyond that, it doesn't. That's why in the Pratimoksha vows, we speak of, in terms of time limit, we speak of two types. One, lifelong, another, day long. Shikshamanas are not accounted for. Well, how they justify that is saying that is the statement that kind of is an overarching or a general statement that covers everything, including that of the Shikshamanas. Some even say it is a some say so that's how one of the justifications. So anyway, in terms of Pratimoksha vows, the length of it doesn't go beyond lifetime. Whereas in the case of Bodhisattva, it actually makes sense when we take Bodhisattva vow. It doesn't make sense to say, I'll take this vow until I die. Because you're committing to become fully awakened. And you want to retain that being the force until you attain full awakening. And thus this reference about efforts, make efforts now in terms of contributing to remembering Bodhisattva, remembering Bodhicitta, and along with that Bodhisattva vows. Unless you remember, you wouldn't know. You would feel like you will take it. That's why these practices like avoiding the 4 negative dharmas and adopting the 4 positive dharmas associated with the guidelines of bodhicitta, aspiring bodhicitta. These are guidelines as opposed to precepts, but guidelines of aspiring bodhicitta. So that's why such practices are in place. Yeah. Other than that, I have no comments on it. I see. But then, in terms of sources, the Abhidhammakosha and its auto commentary, they all kind of lay out the procedure of receiving it, where it says until then, like that. Likewise, is the case with Bodhisattva precept ceremonies. Those are not just written later on, but they have the sources in very, very original texts where the procedures included. Yeah. Other than that, I have no scientific reasons. Yes.
The Prasangika also says that the Pratimoksha is also a non-revelatory form, right? So do they explain it differently?
Do they?
Yeah.
Yeah, but in a scripture I came across that it says from Self-centeredness onward, everyone.
Yeah, in between they don't, but I think the first and the last school both agree on this point. Do they explain it differently then?
Then it's even better. Even in the Prasangika Madhyamika system also, it cannot go beyond lifetime, beyond that, because it is a form. You have to leave body behind. The trouble is accepting it as a mental component, because mind continues, body is left behind. Yeah. But these topics are very have very many opinions, including Sakya Pandita, who says that's the Pratimoksha vows are, they do not go beyond that because it is form. And he's not saying it from the Vaibhashika system. He's saying it from his own personal stand, which should be at least up above, beyond Chittamatra and Prasangika, very preferably Prasangika. But in the refutation, they say this has no source, authentic source, and cannot be established. So in one of the texts that I saw, it mentions that. So it needs to be seen how. Okay, that's like a philosophical question, right? And but it's interesting. There is another question here. Is self-centeredness the opposite of no self? So apparently, self-centeredness is not quite the exact opposite of no self. It is somewhat in that direction, in that when you have self-centeredness, it really looks onto self being kind of very prominent and important, and being the center of the universe. So you see it as the center of the universe. It's far better for the center of the universe to be solid, concrete. So in that aspect, it has some element of being opposite to no self, but it is not quite the exact opposite. So when you say no self, then the opposite would be the notion of self, or the notion of the same self that is being denied in the no self notion. And that self which is denied in the no self notion is not the same as self-centeredness. That kind of a self would be the object of what we usually call self-grasping. Although the term self-grasping is really confusing, at least to new people. Self-grasping is almost like grasping at yourself. It's like holding tight onto yourself. It's very similar to self-centeredness. Very similar. I could see where the question is coming is from a very, very valid, valid foundation. We usually call it self-grasping, and that's a direct translation from Tibetan, and that Tibetan is in turn from Sanskrit. But unless you unpack it, it is quite confusing. Even when we say self-grasping, although there's much to be said in terms of gradations of self-grasping and whatnot, but leave that aside, we just talk of the topmost philosophical school's position, which is considered the final. So in their position, when they speak of self-grasping, the object of the grasping, which is the selfhood, is not necessarily the person as self, as in person. It is more pointing to a notion, an idea of how things could be. So then in that respect, it is applicable both to the person as well as the rest of the phenomena. Because of that, we have this classification of the no self or the selflessness into selflessness of person, selflessness of phenomena. And there, the selflessness, the self of which the lack of we're talking of is not person per se, but rather a notion of an identity that is applicable to person as well as the rest of the phenomena. And that notion is considered the notion of self of which we are talking of the lack of. That notion of self is considered completely mistaken. That's the reason why it is called no self. So a particular notion, unfounded notion of selfhood is being denied by the Buddhists, and that is called no self. But this is not equal to denying self per se, be that taken in the context of a personhood or in the context of an identity. Things have identity, they are unique identities, but not in the way we tend to see in the light of this selfhood. So simply put, self-centeredness is more, would we say, emotional in nature? It seems to have both components of cognitive emotion. Maybe not emotional. Oh, maybe. Yeah, when you say, I am the greatest, I am more important. That doesn't seem to be emotion as much. Pardon? Yeah, that's the same thing. So I'm saying it is not emotional, it is not affective. Rather, it is cognitive. It seems like cognitive. And that's what it looks like. That's what I'm saying. Not affected. So when we say no self, if we want to kind of pair it up with self-centeredness, well, self-centeredness, if we were to pair it up with self-centeredness, then we should say no self, the understanding of no self, or the grasping at the selfhood. So in terms of self-centeredness, the self that it is kind of prioritizing, this notion of self that is prioritizing, doesn't necessarily have to be non-existent, I think. It could have the appearance of a self, inherent as self, but when it comes to grasp at it, doesn't necessarily have to grasp it in the light of inherent existence, I think. Yeah, it must be, because it, in one form, it is a valid one, not just valid, even a virtuous one, right? So anyway, I'm making it more complex. So self-centeredness is holding oneself important, more important than others, at least in the underlying level, the underlying foundation for every expression of self-centeredness is that I'm more important, that I matter more than others. Whereas when we speak of grasping at self, of which the opposite is no self, when we are grasping at self, that is grasping at a mistaken notion of how things might be, should be, could be. Okay, I think it's complex, but thank you for the question. Yeah, by the way, I want to say, in Buddhism, when we talk of selflessness, yeah, this is interesting. When we talk of selflessness, it could be understood in two ways in Buddhism. And in English, maybe it also be, it should be, because I'm using the English terms. Selflessness is opposite of selfishness. Is it? You can say that selflessness is opposite of selfishness. So the no self is not in that light. No self is not this selfishness, selflessness. Because this selflessness and selfishness is more of a mental state that one can either have readily or have to cultivate it, or have some part of it. So that's selflessness, selfishness. Sometimes I call the other one also, grasping at selfhood, as selfishness. Although it may not be the right word, selfishness. That, because I'm kind of talking of it in view of the selflessness part, in view of the selflessness counterpart of it. So basically what I'm saying is selflessness could be understood, one, in the light of the opposite of selfishness. That's different. And we could speak of, or make up make do with another selflessness, another selfishness, of which the opposite is selflessness. There is selflessness not in the context of opposite of selfishness, but rather selflessness in the sense of a lack of the non-existence of a particular notion of selfhood that we are projecting on mistakenly. So the lack of such a selfhood, projected selfhood, is valid, and the opposite of that is the mistaken notion of a selfhood, in the sense of an identity, totally fabricated notion of a selfhood. Is this the make do selfishness counterpart of this selflessness? I think I made it even more complex. Okay. So one important thing is, when we say no self, we are not denying self per se. Usually, even in the scriptures, in making this point very clearly, it speaks. It clearly points out there are two types of selves: one to be denied, other to be upheld. One to be denied is this wrong notion of self, which we project onto things as being objectively real, inherently real, intrinsically real. But the other self that is to be upheld, not denied, but rather upheld, is this selfhood of a person or any kind, anything. Anything has its own self-identity on a conventional level. Things are very distinct from each other and have their self-identity. And that could be called oneself, which is to be upheld. But then we project onto the things a kind of totally mistaken notion of what they are, which is seeing them in an objectified, concrete, solidified, almost existing in and of itself kind of a notion. That is mistaken, and that's what is denied, and it's usually called selflessness, or in most of the Pali texts I see this, no self or non-self. Yeah, I think that is a very crucial distinction to be made. One self is there to be upheld, the other self is there, not there, but kind of made up, which needs to be understood as not existent. Okay, how did we start the session? This is where did we get here from discussing Vinaya to philosophy? Or maybe we are discussing ethical philosophy, philosophy of ethics. Okay, we are there. Yeah, please. Yes, we have done. We finished the praises of ethical discipline, and mainly we were talking of ethical discipline or ethical what are we calling them? Yeah, ethical discipline. Mainly, when we dealt with the praises of the ethical discipline, we were mainly speaking of the ethical discipline of restraint, ethical discipline of abstention, which is the fundamental layer of other levels of ethical discipline. Okay, so here, so it is in that respect, in that light. We're not talking of ethics here. We're focusing on the foundational ethical discipline, if you will. Because in the context of Bodhisattva, we speak of three types of moral disciplines. Whereas in the case of non-bodhisattva in the system of pratimoksha, in the system of individual liberation vehicle, we speak of only one of those ethical disciplines, and that is the shared one shared by the bodhisattvas, and that is the very foundation of the ethical disciplines, and that is the ethical discipline of restraint. So earlier in the praises, we were mainly focusing on that. Likewise here, when we discuss the actual nature or definition of ethical discipline, we are mainly doing that on the basis of the ethics of restraint. So basically, ethics of restraint, you start first from restraining from the unbecoming actions or misdeeds. Based on that, then you can build ethics of doing something, proactive ethics, you could call it. The foundation is kind of a defensive ethics, and then on top of that, then the other two disciplines of the bodhisattvas are more in a more in a constructive, positive note of doing something rather than not doing something. So not doing is the basis upon which then you could do beneficial acts, but has to start from not doing the destructive acts. So here also, in the actual nature that we are discussing, I think we are basically discussing the common ethical discipline shared between individual liberation vehicle and that of the bodhisattvas, namely the ethical discipline of restraint. So there it is defined in terms of relinquishment or in terms of abstention, in terms of restraint. It takes the form of a stand of restraint, a stand of caution against misdeeds. So one is always on a position of avoidance from the negativity. That's a basic foundation of ethics. It makes sense, I think, very clearly, because all the other positive actions in the form of positive action, in the form of affirming, or in the form of affirmation, in the form of constructive doing something, it has to be based on first not doing the unwanted. Only then it makes sense to add that layer of additionally doing something. So in that respect of the ethical discipline of restraint, it mainly involves abstaining from the 7 immoral acts of body and speech. Of course, 7 immoral acts of body and speech are not separate from their underlying mental, afflictions, mental basis, mental afflictions. Sometimes they are called the underlying basis. But the actual precepts are actual precepts take the form not of avoiding mental afflictions, but of avoiding their expression in the form of physical and verbal actions. So that's how it is manageable at that level. We start from grosser one to then subtler one. It's amazing. That's the reason why we say in Vajrayana that once you have all those, by the way, Vajrayana is the vehicle, the topmost vehicle that's to be built on the basis of pratimoksha, the individual liberation vehicle, the bodhisattva, the sutra bodhisattva level, or the paramitayana, as we are discussing paramitayana, and on top of that is the Vajrayana. An individual progression along the path would actually rise up that ladder. So that's why at the topmost Vajrayana level, even starting from Bodhisattva yana, the precepts begin to zoom in, not just stop at the physical and verbal actions, but zoom in into their underlying motivating afflictions. So this, the discipline, the discipline becomes stricter and kind of more zoomed into the sources of those afflictions, or sources of those physical and verbal actions. So the morality, moral precepts itself take the form of avoiding giving rise to those afflictions. And once you generate them, once you give rise to them, you incur the breaches, you incur the infractions. That's really quite unthinkable at the start, to have precepts against afflictions, and they seem to just come and go, right? So the effort of starting with the physical and verbal actions is a very skillful means in kind of eventually kind of reaching out to the source of them in the afflictions, because mainly they have to be curbed. Otherwise, irrespective of how much we succeed in restraining or curbing or subduing the physical and verbal actions, the root, the source will be always there. But then it is not practical to expect beginners to be able to right away curb the afflictions, and thus it is particularly not at all practical to have precepts laid on that basis. So including the underlying mental states giving rise to the seven restraints, ethical discipline refers to the 10 restraints. So there, even in the Patimoksha Sutra, Patimoksha level, individual liberation level of ethical discipline, references are now and then made to even take care of their underlying mental afflictions, not just be content with what you call restraining the physical and verbal actions, but while doing so, because without doing that, you will incur infractions, and thus you will be breaking the precepts. But at the same time, to do a better job at that would be to pay attention to the underlying sources. So very often, the 7 more immoral acts of body and speech are kind of discussed and talked about in connection with their underlying mental states. Not that when you fall prey to the underlying mental states, you will incur breach of the precept, but because one would do a better job in avoiding the breach of the actual precepts if you pay attention to their source afflictions. And ultimately, that's where one has to go. There are references there in that respect, but as I said, they are connected with the respective acts, yet at the same time, merely giving rise to the underlying factors that doesn't incur the breach of the particular precept, because there is no precept laid against them. Rather, the precept is on the other external, on the other end of its expression in the form of physical and verbal actions, but connected with it. So that's why there's always a reference to encourage. I think to encourage and to keep one's awareness in emphasizing where one's efforts eventually should go. In short, the 10 positive course of actions that overwhelm the 10 negative course of actions, that's the main content of the basic ethical discipline of restraint. So when we are speaking of ethical restraint, we are speaking of the positive aspect. When we are speaking of the ethical discipline of restraint, we are talking of the positive side of it, the side of restraint. So the restraint is not the misdeeds themselves. Restraint against these misdeeds is the discipline. That's why in the last line it says not negative course of actions, but the 10 positive course of actions. They form the body of the ethical discipline of restraint. And what are these 10 course of actions in relation to the 10 negative course of actions? Is their corresponding aspects of restraints. That's what I can say. I'm trying to make words by thinking of things. They do not come that handy. Okay, I think this is clear. Okay, let's move on to the next one. Yes, now we are talking about Bodhisattva's discipline. Earlier we mentioned that there are 3 ethical disciplines. This is one of the differences between individual liberation ethical discipline and that of the Bodhisattva discipline. Bodhisattva discipline has 3 tiers, whereas the Pratimoksha, individual liberation ethical discipline, has just 1 tier. And that is the one that is shared between the 2. And that serves as the very foundation, called the ethical discipline of restraint. And then the next one, ethical discipline of gathering virtue. It is word-to-word translation of the Tibetan. Sometimes it is in short called the ethics of restraint, ethics of virtue. So now you see a positive expression, positive approach here. Not just merely restraint and not doing the misdeed, but doing something positive. That includes engaging in the six perfections. The virtue here is comprehensively represented by the 6 parameters. And any other positive. Do you say positive? I think something affirmative or something constructive. Not that the other one was destructive, but it was avoidance. What would be the opposite of avoidance? Pardon? Yeah, engaging. Yeah, engaging positively. So doing something rather than not doing. So far, it took the form of not doing, cautioning against, taking a stand against, abstaining from the negativities. And thus, the restraints themselves are called the positive actions. And it becomes positive only by sheer nature of having restraint from the negativity, not by doing something additional. In the case of the ethical discipline of gathering virtue, or ethics of virtue, this is doing something positively, doing something in addition to the foundation of the restraint. And this usually takes form of 6 parameters. When we say 6 parameters, they kind of include so much of the practices. And then the third one, since we are speaking of Bodhisattva, whose basic aspiration is to benefit sentient beings, and in that they have the highest goal, the most ultimate goal of attaining full awakening, so that they could be of utmost effective benefit to all sentient beings, while at the same time being open to extending help to all sentient beings while they are on the path, because that's part of their training in this, along with this ethical discipline of working for the welfare of sentient beings, or sometimes in short called ethics of altruism. Altruism, yeah, ethics of altruism. It's interesting. We will see what they are composed of. What are the components in them? So this is one of the differences between the two, the individual liberation vehicle and the Bodhisattva. And they have one layer of ethical discipline. The other has two more additional to it. And this makes sense, perfect sense, that it has to align with the Bodhisattva ideal, Bodhisattva aspiration to become fully awakened. And that cannot be achieved just by merely abstaining from the misdeeds. One has to then do something positive on the basis of that. That is the basic foundation. But then, so this is quite telling in our actual daily life also. If we want to be compassionate, first of all, we have to be working on our anger, our tendencies of anger or hatred. With that kind of calmed a little bit, then there's room or space for compassion to be brought in, bit by bit. And when one has kind of not totally eliminated, but kind of really mitigated or subdued it, then the space is much clearer for such positive attitudes to be cultivated. Okay, let's go to the next one. Yeah, so this is explaining them. My computer is also tired. Yes, so this is explaining it. The practice of restraint and abstention, I have no really particular reason to add and abstention as abstention. There's no particular meaning there. But I was being kind of empathic. I'm being emphatic. That gives up any deed that is wrong by nature or by prohibition. So we are speaking of two misdeeds, two types of misdeeds. One is natural, other is prohibitive, prescriptive. I'm reluctant to use this prohibitive one because that doesn't really capture it. But at the same time, I have no other word. Sometimes they use this term stipulated. Something that is a rule that is laid down, not by nature, but laid down. And it could take the form both of should do and not do, not just prohibition. So that's why. Because for that we use the term prescriptive and prescriptive. That's talking of discipline or elements of discipline in a separate light of prescriptive and prescriptive, not along the line of natural and non-natural. We can speak of natural along the line of the natural and non-natural on one side, and then you can completely leave that aside, and then talk of the same misdeeds or wrongdoings or infractions in terms of prescriptive and prescriptive. Oh no, that's a little different. Yeah, when we say basically we are talking of the precepts. Precepts could be prescriptive and prescriptive. And at the same time, precepts can be dealing with natural misdeeds and what I'm calling stipulated misdeeds. For example, you cannot eat after. That's not natural. It takes the form of not doing, but some it can take form of should do. But both of them are stipulated. Whereas, those who have not taken the vow would not incur it. But in terms of the natural one, irrespective. But then prescriptive and prescriptive, along with that, we also speak of permissive. What would be the adjective term for being permitted to permissible? I think permissible. I was thinking of the same ending. That's permissible. So you usually speak of three prescriptive you must do, prescriptive you can't do, permissible you either do or not do. So in the Vinaya, there is a very interesting, rich philosophy of ethics. Apart from our actual precepts, it's a very dynamic philosophy of ethics in terms of prescriptive, and permissibility. Anyway, so the practice of restraint or as abstention that gives up any deed that is wrong by nature or by prohibition, that would be associated with the vows of individual liberation. So this is assuming that a Bodhisattva, when he or she takes on the Bodhisattva ethics, Bodhisattva precepts, or Bodhisattva vow, is already one of these 7 members, one of the 7 precept holders in the individual liberation system. Out of 8, there 1 dayer upavasa that is left out. All the rest. Okay, I'm not going to complicate this anymore. Somehow, how we started kind of set the tone. Okay, let me be here. Okay.
I don't think I'm really understanding what is the difference between a deed that is wrong by nature and that's prescriptive. Do you have an example of what would be prescriptive but not naturally wrong?
Yes. So first, natural misdeeds are the 10 in a gross category, 10 non-virtuous actions. Those are the natural, in that irrespective of whoever engages in them would incur the negativity, irrespective of whether or not they hold a precept against them. Now those who hold the precept, they could have additional precepts, additional rules to abide by, which would not otherwise apply to those who have not taken the vow. I was giving the example of the ordinary ones not allowed, unless you have certain reasons such as sickness and whatnot. They're not allowed, not supposed to eat meal after midday. But others who eat it, they do not incur any infection. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, but what we are calling provision, it's not the right one. It is stipulated, natural and stipulated. Still, I don't know. I'm using the term stipulated. I saw it being used by someone, and I was kind of banking on them. But when I use it, it doesn't. Prescribe. Somehow, when we have to resort to use of prescriptive, then prescriptive takes this particular form of should do, as opposed to not do. But then if we leave that prescriptive aspect apart and forget about it and just speak of prescriptive, then prescriptions can prescriptions take the form of not do also? I think difficult, right? Mostly prescriptions are do this. So that's the reason why I'm reluctant to use prescriptive. The prescribed is even not that, because sometimes the rules could take the form of prescription. Others, they are prescription. Okay. Oh, no. We're going into, yeah.
Can I ask a question?
Yes, please.
A little bit off this, but
Sure, please.
so why would someone be negatively harmed if they took a vow that only applied to a few who've taken the vow, but it wasn't naturally wrong? It's not like there's a God who's arbitrary and keeping track. So where does the consequence come from?
I see. It's just from the working of causality. You engage in negative action and you incur the results of it. Oh, yes. The actions, engaging in any of the natural misdeeds is basically an action, karma. An action of the body, action of speech. And then for those who have taken ordination, they would have additional rules or precepts, guidance, that are meant to help them on their journey. But then that would involve abiding by certain rules which may not be naturally negative, but would be prescriptively or stipulatedly binding for them to uphold. When they fail to uphold it, they incur a breach, transgression, and that's meant for their benefit, but they fail in upholding it, and because of that, there is some lapse there on their part. Not that it is a negative, not that when you eat meal after midday, you incur a breach of that rule, but you do not, and but that breach is not negative. It's only a breach, a lapse, an infraction. So some kind of a, what do you call, some kind of a lapse, yeah, which you want to mend. And usually all it takes, except for exceptions, usually all it takes is just confess it. Because those are in place for one to be successful in one's mission. Not just rely on restraining from the natural negativities, but also being facilitated with certain scaffolds being proposed by someone who experienced the need for that, what could be it. So Buddha's teaching from his own experience of what it involved in his training. And based on that, he's laying out this. You're welcome.
I have a question about the abandonment of 7 immoral acts. Is that kind of the same as what I think of as the 5 precepts: no killing, no stealing, no false speech, including lying and so forth, no sexual misconduct, and no intoxicants? Is that what we're talking about?
Intoxicant is not included there in the 10. So those are 4 and additional 3. So basically we speak of 3 of the body, 4 of the speech. They include all the 4 that you mentioned, except for the drinking. 4 of the body is sokje, killing, sokje, majinle, stealing, boyim, sexual misconduct. And then of the speech, 4 of the speech are speeches for doing, telling lie, tama, divisive speech, doing tama, siksup, harsh speech, and yeah, the last one is idle talk. That's quite difficult.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yes. Yes, please.
Geshe.
Yeah.
So I got a little bit confused on this. This is actually the Bodhisattva discipline, conduct discipline, which is Bodhisattva precepts, right? Which is behind the aspiring bodhicitta and also engaging bodhicitta behind the red prayer book. There's like a root precepts and auxiliary precepts. Am I correct?
Yeah.
Okay, it's not to the 5 precepts or 8 precepts of the lay Patimokkha.
So no. What's the question?
This Bodhisattva ethical discipline, is it referring to the root precepts and also the auxiliary precepts?
I see. Okay.
Or
yeah.
is it the 5 lay precepts and the 8 precepts?
Oh, okay. That's very interesting. That's very, very important question. So that's very important. I needed to bring this forth also. So far, I have explained that they share the very fundamental layer, fundamental tier. It would sound like it would be the same. It's not the same. There are additional actions to be restrained. So in the same ethical discipline of restraint, when it comes to bodhisattvas, there are additional negative actions to be avoided. Additional by way of specified in additional, not by way of a gross general category like that of the 10 non-virtues, but additional taking specific form, specific shapes. So that's where so for Bodhisattva, when we talk of the ethical discipline of restraint, it will have all the 10 negativities, all the 10 negativities covered. On top of, if that Bodhisattva is a monk or nun, he or she would have additional layer of their deeds of prohibition included there. And then for a Bodhisattva, being Bodhisattva on top of being a bhikshu or a bhikshuni, right? Then comes the 18 root transgressions and 46 secondary transgressions. They all are in this, because those are all to be restrained. Those are all to be avoided, and they come within this. So one has to remember, for bodhisattvas, that is the although the traditions differ in terms of how much they count in it, but the Tibetan, I think even among the Tibetan schools, I'm not so sure, there may be differences, but the Geluk take of that is based on Tsongkhapa's work, where he drew the precepts from different sources, different sutra sources, and that makes a total of what we understand as 18 root transgressions and 46 secondary transgressions. Root transgressions and 46 secondary transgressions. That would be for the bodhisattva. If that bodhisattva is a monk or nun, or he is a lay person, based on what level of precepts he or she may have taken, those restraints will be added on top of the 10 natural negativities. They all take the form of restraint. So I was just, for the sake of convenience, saying this is common, but not common in terms of what it contains. Oh, I thought I would get away from being complex and complicated. But you are drawing me further and further into it. Yeah, it's good. It's good. This is relevant. This is relevant. But unless I see, questions, I would be little reluctant in throwing those details. It will be too much. Yeah, in terms of, okay, let's see. In terms of going easy, it's not easy. Okay, let's move on to the next one. So far what I'm doing is I've given a etymological meaning of sila, ethical discipline in general, and have basically focused on the very basic layer of ethics in the form of restraint. This is quite interesting. Restraint, basically it takes the form of no harming. Not harming is the very basis of a spiritual practice, particularly, and that's the same case with other religions as well, but more so in Buddhism, because it's talking of eventually targeting the afflictions to their very core, and including their very subtle traces. And that should begin by first being able to take hold of this harmful intention, harmful tendency. In one of the, I think in Shijapa, in Ayadeva's 400 verses, he kind of, he's in a kind of a dialogue back and forth with non-Buddhists, and they were discussing on the nature of Dharma, and Ayadeva refutes their take of Dharma, and then eventually the opponent asks, what then is Dharma? And he says, essentially it is non-harm. Non-harm, harmlessness. Yeah, you begin from non-harm and then grow from there. Yeah, so what I did was, and then putting the ethics of restraint in perspective by showing its importance, by praising, by the list of praises, and then we divided. We looked into the nature of the ethical discipline, and then we talked about the divisions in the context of Bodhisattvas. And right now we are in the middle of defining or explaining, unpacking each of the divisions, but not fully unpacking, but unpacking. Okay, so this ethical discipline of gathering virtue, or the ethics of virtue. This is the practice of focusing on virtues, such as, I said, such as 6 perfections. If at all there can be other virtues, they should all include, right? In virtues that they have to cultivate in their effort in realizing their aspiration of full awakening. 6 perfections is a very comprehensive category. So what does this additional layer of ethics involve? Practicing. Now it is practice of focusing on virtues such as 6 perfections, and what to do? Develop the virtues, not just restrain from the negativities, but develop the virtues that one has not developed in one's word, in one's mind, not spoiling the ones that one has already developed, and increasing both ever further. This is one-to-one with Tibetan. So Tibetans speak in these terms. I think if someone were to be original English writer, it would be totally put in different, much more easily handleable way. Ma jeba Majeba jeba, jeba manyamba jeba, jeba peva. Yeah, majeba, majeba jeba, jeba manyamba jeba. So basically engaged in not just restraining from the negativity, but actively, proactively, actively engaged in gathering, cultivating, bringing in virtues. And in terms of that, one has to be aware of what virtues are absent that needs to be brought in, what virtues are already there that needs to be maintained. And then in terms of both of those, once they are generated, one has to then not just stop there, but then increase them, strengthen them, make them even more stronger like that, and thereby bring them to the level of perfection. I see. In terms of the format, it is the same. Oh yeah, exactly the same. Exactly the same, yeah. Although there it is in reference to bodhicitta. May bodhicitta that's not yet born be born. May that has been born not decline. And may that increase evermore. Yeah. Same mentality is brought there. And we speak in the same tone in regard to negativities to be avoided. Look for what are there to be avoided. Look for what are not there. Make sure not let them come in. And then double down on really getting rid of them. Like that. Okay. So this is quite clear, yeah. The ethical discipline of working for the welfare of sentient beings. The practice of acting for the welfare of sentient beings by focusing on the welfare of, two welfares. Welfare of 11 sorts of sentient beings. 11 sorts of sentient beings. What's our immediate reaction? Am I included there? Who could be excluded in there? Just a list of 11. How come we are so many? These are broad categories. Everyone is included. And then accomplishing their aims in this and future lives in a suitable manner without wrongdoing. This is very much in line with the Bodhisattva idol, right? Earlier, earlier we spoke of how the Bodhisattva's task can be divided into two, of ripening, working on themselves in making them more mature spiritually, and in working to the same effect on others. So the first two ethics, the ethics of restraint and the ethics of virtue, they fall in the category of working on oneself, in ripening, maturing oneself. This one is reaching out to others in making them mature. So in the case of the Bodhisattvas, there is specific precept to do, to be proactive and do something. And this particular category is do something in terms of benefiting sentient beings. So it's not just mental cultivation. Mental cultivation is the main thing to focus on, and then with that force growing, and with the facilities, situations proper, one is then supposed to deliver on them in actual world also. Yes. Yes, please. when I was preparing for this talk and preparing the slides, I wasn't so sure how to approach this, because it's on ethics and how you would be receptive. That's why I just kept it to the mere basic definitions and whatnot, and the details are all in Tibetan. It's kept for myself so that I could look at them if need be. But at least they are ready in Tibetan. I could then. Yes, please. Sorry.
What does it mean by accomplishing their aims? Because like, what if their aims are non-virtuous, right? Like, is any of their aims, or like, I just don't understand that.
I see. Yeah, this is, I mean, you're really pointing to the choice of word in English. So it is basically saying meeting their needs. Meeting their needs. The needs are aims. What they need, what they want. So not so much going into the want part of it, because there will be no end. Bodhisattva don't want to spoil sentient beings even further. But when it comes to needs, that needs to be met. It could be spiritual need, physical need, and those are what the Bodhisattva is supposed to be eyeing on and do their best in accordance with their capacity. If they are not capable of doing it right now, aspire to do so. If they are capable to the extent they are, do it, deliver it. That way, meeting the needs of sentient beings, both in the present and in the future lives. The future life is more long-term oriented. Yeah, so accomplishing their aims is, their needs in a suitable manner without wrongdoing. Again, that's very essential, to do it properly, in a suitable manner, in a manner that suits the situation, environment, culture, etc., etc. But at the same time, don't use that as an excuse in indulging in wrongdoing. That would totally defeat the purpose. Yes, please.
Were these ideas also taken from the text Illumination of the Intent? What you spoke on today, or is that more the praises from this morning, I think? Were from
Let me
text.
think. I think I took them from Lamrim. Let me think. Have you seen that? Okay, then it's from Lamrim. But I was also referring to a commentary by, there's a very succinct commentary on the work of Tsongkhapa on Bodhisattva precepts, based on Arya Asanga's Bodhisattva Bhumi. He focuses on the morality aspect of Bodhisattva practice, and he expands that one. So beautiful. And it's little longish, but then another later master by the name of Muchu has kind of summarized it. So beautiful, and yet with sophistications. There's so much sophistication in terms of what is the right thing, what is the right way of doing, what is the right way of observing this precept. How would one fail? What level of failure would that be? Would that be a failure with affliction? Would that be a failure with non-affliction? Would that be a permissible one in how they deal with that precept? It's so interesting. And then it comes with the sophistication in terms of what, in the case of a bodhisattva, could be allowed, permissible, given their respective level of capacity. It's so beautiful. I mean, but there are actual translations of the Tsongkhapa's work itself, and that's even beautiful, much more beautiful. I think Garrett's Farm has translated that. Yeah. Yes.
Before, when you were talking about, say, like a monastic eating after lunch, that's a lapse. You said that it's not negative. So there's no negative karma generated there.
Yeah, there's no negative karma. It can become negative, but not by in and itself is negative. It's a bridge, it's a lapse, and it has its own price.
So
Because of what it could have helped you, you failed in upholding it. And that all came from compassionate, omniscient mind with nothing, with no other purpose but to help us, grounded on his experiences. And all those add up to the gravity of it, to the weightage of it. Not gravity, but to the weightage of it.
To the weight of it. Okay.
Yeah.
So if you ate with greed, it would become negative. But if you ate just seeing it as medicine so that you could do beneficial works, yeah.
I'm not talking in that respect. I'm talking particularly in respect of, you remember, when you eat with greed, would it be negative? No. She's adding the greed part of it. But particularly, I'm thinking along the line of what we have something called 4 doors to downfall, 4 doors of downfall, out of which one is engaging in it out of disrespect. That is a deliberate disrespect, and that whatever it touches, it becomes negative. The others are by reason of not knowing that is the precept, by reason of afflictions. So afflictions are there, but under the influence of expression, affliction when you engage in it, that's not necessarily negative. It seems that's not necessarily negative, because afflictions are the force behind it, not the actual action. And then heedlessness, carelessness. And then the fourth one is deliberate disrespect, deliberate I care not, I don't care, disregard, deliberate disregard. I see. Yeah. But it is not just lack of respect. It is more stronger than that. You could say there is a lack of respect, but that's a deliberate kind of knowingly disregarding it. Yeah, deliberate disregarding. It's already time. Yeah, so I think I took this from Lamrim, but also referred to this other text. What else? Yeah, the illumination of intent. I always go back to this second chapter on ethical restraint. Even the illumination itself is not that long. It's so rich. Yes, please. Next one.
Shila,
Yeah.
if a lay person actually break or even like breach, right, the ethical discipline, what shall the lay person do?
What do you mean? What do you mean?
For-
lay precept holder?
Lay precepts order, yeah.
Yeah. Then they have to.
Also Bodhisattva precepts.
Oh yeah. So what's the question?
Break
Yeah.
or even a breach, what shall we do?
Oh yeah, you have to confess and you have to purify it. And in one of the scriptures, there's an interesting scripture called Namgyal Nyingbo Shibido. Namgyal Nyingbo Shibido. One of the Bodhisattvas called Kristi Garba. Yeah, is it Kristi? Pardon? Kristi Garba. There is a sutra, sutra requested by Kristi Garba, where how many? Yeah, some 13, 14 of the Bodhisattva precepts come from. Out of the 18 root, 14 come from there. But usually only 13 are counted, because one is overlapping with another, Lapti, Shiksha Samujaya. Yeah. So there is even a specific confession ritual there in honor of Kristi Garva. Yeah, Kristi Garva. Yeah, very beautiful practice, specific purification practice for the Bodhisattvas, and also looking for signs of whether you have purified them or not. So interesting. But so irrespective of what particular external form takes, the main thing is the 4 reliance, and then doing purification. Do we do here the confession of the Bodhisattva? No. What I meant was during Posada. Yeah, eventually we would be able to do that. As the members grow, it would be so good to include that in the Tibetan tradition. We do that. That's done not all the time, but most of the time they do that. They incorporate that in the Posada. In terms of going through the precepts and then confessing them like that. Right now in the Posada, we only do the purification of our individual liberation. But then there could be people who have taken Bodhisattva vow, and then even Vajrayana vow. They have their own precepts to give and bridge that could have happened. And the Posada is used to incorporate those 2 layers also in confessing and doing that. So that's, I succeeded in passing the time. Yeah, I don't want to keep you further because you have been working so hard all day. So next we can go to the next slide. Okay, next time. Yeah, I think it has been very good. The questions that you asked really helped touch the other aspects that I wasn't thinking of touching on. I didn't have the slides, English slides prepared for. But if need be, we could go there. Whatever sources I put ready. Okay.
May the spiritual teachers who lead me on the sacred path, and those spiritual friends who practice it, have long life. May I pacify completely all outer and inner hindrances. Grant such inspiration, I pray. May the lives of the venerable spiritual mentors be stable, and their virtuous actions spread in the 10 directions. May the light of Lobsang's teachings dispel the darkness of the beings in the 3 worlds always increase. Iram Guru Rana Mandalakam Niryatayami.
Due to this merit, may we soon attain the awakened state of Guru Buddha, that we may be able to liberate all sentient beings from their sufferings. May the precious body mind, not yet born, arise and grow. May the born and low decline, but increase forever.